Well, let's get more on the shooting of that Berlin attack suspect. One of the issues that will concern the authorities is that Europe's most wanted man was able to cross international borders, making his way from Germany through either Switzerland or Austria to Italy. There are, of course, no controls on Europe's borders inside the Schengen zone. Well, Tony Smith is a former Director General of the UK Border Force. Very good afternoon to you, Tony. Real questions now about Schengen, whether it's successful, about whether it can prevent people from getting involved in situations like this, where you're seeing attacks taking place in Germany. Are we effectively seeing the end of Schengen?
Well, this is a very worrying case indeed, and as your report shows, you know, this chap being able to cross the border before he perpetrated these acts and to cross borders since then reminds me very much of some of the conversations we were having last year after the Paris attacks, where, you know, 7 of the 12 attackers there had been to Syria and had managed to get back into the EU undetected by border authorities. All 12 of them had been travelling around the Schengen zone, often armed and without weapons. It seems this person also was armed. He had no identity documents after the event. There was a full manhunt in place, and nonetheless, as you say, he was able to cross 2 or 3 borders before he was eventually apprehended, and even then really on the basis of more of a suspicious routine stop rather than an intelligence-led operation. So it does beg the question, what is the Schengen Group going to do about their borders? And in particular, how are they going to respond to critical incidents like this in the future?
And Tony, I mean, after the Paris attacks last November, we had the then Interior Minister, Bernard Cazeneuve, saying that he wanted to, the phrase that he used was see systematic controls put in place in order to prevent terrorist attacks like we saw in Paris and then, of course, in Nice from taking place. Clearly, those measures that have been put in place since last November have been ineffective.
Yes, you're right. And I mean, the French actually do have authority from the Commission to continue with border checks. There have been some reports that this person may have travelled through France. Well, actually, you know, the French government since Paris and also since Nice have retained an authority to introduce border controls in the Schengen zone, because there are circumstances within the code that enable that. But there doesn't seem to be a routine, coordinated response across all member states about what to do in an emergency situation like this where there is a manhunt. And there should be collaboration and proper command and control and governance between the right people in the right places, so that when there is a threat or a significant threat like this, that the agencies concerned know who's doing what, who's acting, who's putting up exit checks, entry checks, and how are major arterial routes being monitored across borders. And I'm afraid that the Schengen Group have got some way to go, in my view, yet before they're able to satisfy the border security community that they've been able to do that.
It's not the first attack that we've seen in Germany. We've seen attacks in the past. We've seen attacks taking place in Belgium, in France. There must be communication channels that are put in place for all those countries that are within the Schengen zones, those 26 European countries. Why, up until this point, are they still getting it disastrously wrong, where you can have individuals effectively travelling through 3 countries in order to get away from the scene of a terror attack? And this is a person who was deemed to be the most wanted man on the European continent.
Well, indeed, there has been a lack of communication. I think that's been recognised in the past, not just internationally, but also nationally, between various agencies. Now, one thing that we do here, I know, is collaborate between our security services, our police service and our border force very, very quickly, so we are able to exchange information and intelligence, and we try our very best to do that with our international partners in Interpol and Europol. I think the evidence emerging from Brussels and Paris that was not happening routinely in France or Belgium. The EU have said they're going to step up to the plate and reform their systems and encourage more information and intelligence sharing, but it's not just about that. It's all about this question of critical incident response mechanisms. And, you know, this is going to happen again. We need to be satisfied that countries have got the capability very quickly to put up emergency controls when there's a situation like a manhunt. And I hope there'll be a significant investigation into what did happen here and what might happen in future.
And Tony, just briefly, I mean, what do you think can be learned? What lessons can be learned by the UK Border Force, for example, and the other authorities within Britain from this attack that we saw in Germany?
Yeah, well, I mean, I do remember, I'm afraid, with some pain after 7/7. You may remember 21/7, where we had 4 people who were wanted. We had a manhunt going, and one of them did manage to escape the UK and get down to Italy, where we had to bring him back. So we did develop a procedure, an agreement between ourselves, Special Branch, the police and other agencies and the carriers, so that if we are required to introduce physical exit checks, we can do it very, very quickly. We tested that on a number of occasions during the Olympic Games. It worked very, very well. So we have got a recognised process and procedure. And of course, we've got a very strong border in the UK, as opposed to in Schengen Group, where there aren't any borders. But I think the main thing is what they can learn from us is setting up governance, command and control and tactical response systems, so when a critical incident is called, like this one, that they are able to react quickly, and I'm afraid they didn't in this case.
OK, Tony Smith, a former Director General of the UK Border Force, many thanks indeed for joining us.